Hey, Futurist, Jim Carroll from the virtual broadcast studio. Here's another show in my series on reinvention, and it's all leading into my book, Now What? Reinvention and the Role of Optimism in Our Post-COVID World. Now, if you've been tracking what's been going on, this all started with an interview with Santa Claus back in December. I interviewed an older fellow who was a mall Santa and obviously impacted by COVID-19. And he began doing virtual Santa broadcasts to reach children. And I was kind of intrigued by the concept because he was busy reinventing his reality for a new world. So I realized that there's a story here. And I've been interviewing individuals on what they've been doing to align to a new reality. So I interviewed a pastor about what he has done to take his religion into the online world. I interviewed a rock star, a drummer with band Scritti Politti. I've interviewed a sports fitness professional, a magician, and a fireman. And it's all around the theme of what do we do to align to a new and different reality. I think part of what I'm examining here is how do we challenge ourselves in terms of the arc of our career. Now, you think about the typical career arc. You know, we start out with a few skills and we develop those skills and we enhance those skills and we move our way up the ladder. It's this progression in which we're going up the arc. But what we know is that in a lot of cases, the arc is not smooth and the arc is different and the arc can change. And your ability to reinvent depends on what you do with the arc. And I've got a special treat today because we're interviewing a fellow named Jeffrey Lee Campbell who has really started at the top of the arc and then had to figure out what he needed to do to align to reality of a new world. Now, that sort of follows my own career progression. Look, I started out as an accountant and now I'm a futurist. And certainly I've had to reinvent my world given the reality of what has occurred with COVID. So I came across Jeffrey Lee with his book, Do Stand So Close. And it's a remarkable book, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his voyage. And I'll give a little bit away of his personal voyage because it truly is a remarkable story. Now, here's, to set the stage, he's a guitarist, and he wanted to build his career in the music industry. He moved to New York. He was working, weddings and traditional gigs, and he was actually selling candy in theaters to get by. And while he was doing that, he was being interviewed to appear in Sting's band. And in a matter of months, he found himself on stages worldwide in front of 50,000 people as a guitarist with Sting in this tour in 1987-88, in front of thousands of people. And, talk about a rocket ride, because all of a sudden, he's selling candy in a theater, and now he's on stages worldwide. And it's a remarkable story. There's a moment in the book where he's talking about he's on an Amnesty International concert tour after that, and he's actually on stage when Bruce Springsteen walks out, and he's playing guitar with Bruce Springsteen on the stage. I mean, you can't have a more magical voyage in your life. It really, you get a sense of the magic of his voyage when he appeared on Saturday Night Live with Sting. And they were playing the song of Little Wing, and he took off with his guitar solo, and it's a moment of magic where he's realized, I'm finally achieving my goals. And you realize that, he's a very humble fellow because you look at his tour, and there's a portion in the book where he's talking about playing his hometown, and he's going back to his hometown with Sting and playing in a massive sports facility. His family is there, his friends are there. I mean, this is the type of moment that we all live for. But the thing is, the tour ended, and things didn't quite go as Jeffrey had planned. And his arc of his career certainly underwent some very dramatic changes. And, really, I think what happened is he started at the top and then had to figure out, where do I go from here? So, we're going to have a conversation with Jeff. Jeff, welcome to the studio.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is I got to get back to my desk here and put you up on the TV. And look, I read the book. It's an absolutely fascinating book, and it's an absolutely fascinating voyage. And I think that's the thing that really struck me. When you start at the top, what next? So I think to give you sort of a sense of this whole issue of reinvention, because you did develop a very, very unique career after those magical moments. Let's start at the beginning. You're a young guitarist. You're in North Carolina, and you want to build a career out of it. You moved to New York. Take us a little bit through the story and what led up to ending up on a tour with Sting.
Well, I think what was really important. I grew up playing in bands all through middle school and high school. Started playing but I ended up studying music at the University of Miami. And the education there is what gave me the real foundation to move to New York and compete on the big stage, in my opinion. I mean, understanding theory and how to read music and stuff like that, and being around world-class players in Miami after being a big fish in a small pond in North Carolina. Miami prepared me. Even though I did not come straight to New York from Miami, I went back to North Carolina, played there for a few years, and really started itching for more of a challenge. And I had a college buddy who lived in New York. He's like, come visit. Came up for a visit, fell madly in love with the city, and was determined to move to New York to give it a shot.
So you get to New York. What do you do to get things going? I mean, you're an unknown. You've got some skills. You're hoping to break into the music scene. How did that go?
Well, I had friends from college and a couple of friends from North Carolina who had moved up here as well. So you reach out to all your friends, but they're struggling for work too. So as you mentioned, I was trying to play weddings and do things like that, but a friend of mine worked for a Broadway concession stand, so I got a job selling candy at Broadway shows. I mean, $15 a shift, but at least I was making some money. But when I first came to New York, I really was kind of more like, it was almost like going away to Europe for a year or something. I thought, let's give New York 1 year of your life and see what happens. Then fate intervened, and on the 1 year anniversary, the eve of my 1 year anniversary, I was playing at Madison Square Garden with Sting. So the first year was the pinnacle.
How did that come about? How do you go from selling candy in a theater and trying to break into the music scene, and you're in Madison Square Garden with arguably one of the most popular guitarists of all time, during the 80s at Madison Square Gardens?
I wrote my book because so many musicians just scratched their heads and said, how did you move to New York? You're selling candy, and 8 months later you're on tour with Sting. It just didn't make any sense. And so part of the reason I wrote the book was to kind of explain it. And like everything in life, it was not a straight line. It was a lot of crooked things that happened, crooked lines, nothing illegal, crooked lines that you move forward, backward, that kind of thing. But, what I've learned over the years is so much of your success is out of your hands. Things have to happen, cosmic things, the stars have to align, things I had no control over, like I auditioned for a band, did not get the job, but the guitar player who got the job decided to quit, so I was the second choice. We went to Europe. I was playing in a dive bar in Italy, and Sting was in town for a festival, and he came into the bar to hear the band and saw me. So
serendipity. So you were sort of discovered that magical accidental discovery. Which
Sure.
led you into this. So then reading the book, you underwent, a bit of it sounded like a unique process where he's examining you and examining your playing skills, and you weren't really getting any feedback from him as to whether this was going to happen or not. And then one day, like, you're in the band and we're going to tour the world.
Yeah, well, I look back on it, it was a span of 4 or 5 days between the first time I met him and him hiring me, but it felt like 4 or 5 years, because every moment you're thinking, am I going to be hired? I don't want to make a misstep. So you're under a microscope. And it was 4 days of rehearsals and our auditions. And on the 4th day, he hired me. He said, you can have the job if you want it.
Now, did you know at that point that it was going to be a worldwide tour, that you were going to be, spending the next year and a half of your life out on the road in the proverbial rock and roll machine?
But I was young and single, and when I first went to meet his manager to set the audition, first thing he asked me was like, are you married? And I said, no. And he said, good, the tour will be long. So, and it was. It was a year solid. We played 181 shows in 1 year, which is over 3 a week, right? And, I'll talk to people today and they go, oh, we have a big tour coming up. We're doing 40 shows. I'm like, 40? We did 181. So it was nonstop for a year.
And a lot of rock documentaries that I've seen sort of show like the pinnacle of all live performances is Brazil. I mean, that's where you get up in front of 150,000, 200 and 250,000 people. And that was just a few weeks into your, touring career.
Yeah, our first show of the tour was in Rio. It was actually the largest crowd we played for the entire year. It was 250,000 people. And I tell people, I mean, I can't comprehend it when I think about I was selling candy on Broadway. 2 weeks later, I was on Saturday Night Live with Sting. A month later, I was in front of 250,000 people in Rio de Janeiro. And
That's crazy fast. I mean, bar mitzvahs to a quarter of a million people.
I was having trouble finding bar mitzvahs to play in New York because I had to get in line. So I was truly selling candy bars and cocktails to theater goers. I had on my tie. And
do you remember any thinking from that process of what you were thinking in terms of long term, like a career you might build out of this, or was it just like one wild ride with everything that we could imagine in our teenage excitement of what a rock and roll lifestyle is like? Was it just this wild adventure, or were you sort of beginning to think in your mind, well, this is what I'm going to hoping to be doing in 5 years?
Well, I think I assumed that I would be able to continue at that level, which was very naive at the time. But I mentioned in my book, it's like I thought it granted me lifetime membership in Club Rockstar, but it's not that way. If you look at the analogy of an athlete, you can win the World Cup or the Super Bowl your first season and then never sniff it again. You get traded to another team and you never get another shot at the championship. So I naively thought, oh, well, this will happen. This will continue to happen at this level or close to it. But that was not at all what happened. For better or for worse, Sting was such a huge rock star that after our tour, he took 3 years off and did a show on Broadway. So he takes off. I have to find work. And then by the time he hires a new band, he's got all new musicians. So.
Right. So you've gone essentially from the top. And in the midst of all that, so you were a year and a half on the road with Sting, and then there was the Amnesty tour, which took you to Africa and some magical places. But then it came to a crashing halt. I mean, essentially, yes. Your life, you hit the peak, and that's the thing about the career arc. You hit the peak, and it was like, whoops, now what?
But I had more money in the bank than I'd ever seen, which, looking back, it was not that much money. But for me, it seemed like a lot of money. So I thought, I'll just tread water until the next phone call. And then I treaded and treaded and treaded, and finally had to go back to work doing weddings. It was very humbling to tour the world with Sting playing in front of hundreds of thousands of people, and then all of a sudden being at a wedding reception playing the first dance for the bride and the groom. There's nothing wrong with that, but it seemed backwards to me at the time.
It's hard to start at the top. I mean, that in essence is really what you've been through. What were you doing as you came back to try to get things happening again, or did you just sort of think it would fall in your lap? I think there's some valuable guidance here for other people who might have a similar, sort of strange career arc where they're way up there and then they expect the world, just...
Well, I know what I would do different, and I've seen a lot of people do this, friends of mine that have very high profile jobs. They don't get too full of themselves. I've seen guys come off the road. I did a gig one night at the Waldorf Astoria here in New York it was a corporate party. And by the end of the night, the dance floor had thinned out. There was maybe 8 people dancing. And the saxophonist beside me was Billy Joel's saxophone player. And he had just played in Philadelphia's baseball stadium like 2 days earlier. And I was like, man, how does this feel to go from the baseball stadium here? He said, it's fine, I'm having a good time. And I've worked with a drummer that was at the White House with Sheryl Crow one night, and we were playing a Christmas party the next night. The point is I thought I was above certain gigs, but the veterans I've seen, they move back and forth between the big gig, the small gig. Just keep your name out there and keep working.
That's a really interesting point, because I mean, a lot of people, and what I'm trying to explore here is a lot of people develop a certain degree of success and a certain level of their status in life, and when it falls out from underneath them, they find it very difficult, I guess, to go to a different plateau, or to redefine what success is, or to redefine how they judge themselves. And so is that a little bit of what you were going through then, and you weren't thinking like them?
Well, absolutely, but I mean, I was 30 years old. I couldn't retire, so I had to do something, and I had no appreciable skills other than strumming a guitar, because it's all I'd ever done. In hindsight, maybe I should have going back to school and gotten a law degree or learn a different trade. But all I'd ever done is played music, so that's what I continued to do. And it was a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I think I was determined to prove that the year with Sting was not a fluke, that I was a musician of a quality that deserved to be in New York working. So
it was that mindset that I'm big rock star material, and I did Sting, so I should be doing things that are of equal.
In baseball, the analogy would be playing for the major leagues and then being sent back down to the minor leagues, and instead of quitting, you grind it out till you get back to the majors.
Yeah, so maybe one of the challenges with our reinvention process is we let our ego get in the way a little bit too much. So you didn't go back to school. I mean, music is your passion, guitar is your life. So you're back, you're playing weddings and things like that. But then you started doing some session work, and you had some remarkable activities with some folks along the way. But you somehow made a go of it. Lead us through the next part of the story, because this part is really, really interesting.
Well, do you play golf by any chance?
I do, yeah. Golf? Yeah, quite a bit. About 100 games last year, so I play a lot of golf.
You and I will know what I'm getting ready to say, whether or not the viewers do or not. But to me, my golf game is horrible. But if I hit one good shot in 18 holes, I'm ready to play again.
Yeah.
Right? One good shot, and you're like, I love this. Let's go again. I feel like my career is that way. You get one good shot in your career. I mean, I would play years of weddings and small bars, but then the phone would ring and I would end up spending a week with Aretha Franklin, or do a TV show with Michael Bublé. I got to know John Bon Jovi and worked some with him. And those are like hole-in-ones. You're out on the golf course slogging along, and then all of a sudden the phone rings and it's Aretha's manager. And you're like, okay, this makes sense. So I got enough bumps along the way to stay in it for the long haul.
You weren't ready to give up and go off and do something else. I love that golf analogy. Here we are 30 years later, and then you had a bit of another magical break, which really began to define. I guess it was sort of a 10-year time span between when you finished on the spring tour, Sting tour, to the next phase of your life success.
Well, again, as a freelance musician, I had to pursue every possible income stream just to kind of keep the lights on. It's not, you're not going to get rich doing it. So I was doing a lot of different gigs, bars, weddings, recording sessions, low-budget recording sessions. And another income stream in New York is playing on Broadway. But you don't start with a Broadway chair. You start as a sub for Broadway musicians. And a friend of mine knew somebody that needed a sub, which is kind of a thankless job where you go and learn the music, and then you're like a standby. If they need a night off, they call you to come in and play. And you're expected to come in there and nail it while you're completely nervous and have not had the repetitions that the regular people have. So it's very... it's high stress, but I started subbing on Broadway, and because where I live, the neighborhood I live in is only a 10-minute walk from Times Square in the theater district, it made Broadway very appealing to me because I wasn't, unlike my friends commuting in from the suburbs, I wasn't having to sit in traffic at a tunnel or a bridge and then find a parking space. I just walked to work. So I loved the Broadway fit. And after playing weddings and driving and coming home in the middle of the night, I was through work at 10:30, 11 o'clock every night. So I liked Broadway. I liked the known quantity of Broadway. So I just kept, subbing on Broadway shows and caught a break and got a show. And then it led to another show and another show. But as I mentioned in my book, getting a Broadway gig requires high-level skills. Getting a Broadway hit requires high-level luck. You just have to be in the right place at the right time. And I was when I was asked to do Mamma Mia.
Right, which and we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's the moment in the book that really struck me when you wrote, things finally looked up when I looked down into the orchestra pit of Broadway, and that became a 20-year career for you, and it's still your career even as we are in the pandemic. You've had a bunch of shows along the way.
I was doing a brand new show when the pandemic hit, and I have work waiting on the other side. So however long. I'm at the point in my career where I'm not going to reinvent myself as a lawyer, so I will wait it out. I do have the resources at this point because I have such a long career to kind of wait out the pandemic and go back to work. I'm glad. If I didn't have work on the other side, maybe I would have considered a huge change. But I have work waiting for me. But when they first closed down Broadway, they said 1 month. Then they said 3 months. Then they said 6 months. And now it's expanded to, maybe close to 2 years before we're back.
Yeah, and here I am stuck down in my basement, and that's why I'm doing the, various things like this, exploring the concept of reinvention. So I guess a lot of folks don't think or appreciate the role of the guitarist, the role of the musician down in the Broadway pit, and don't realize that somebody can turn that into a 20, 30, 40-year lifetime career. And that's what struck me about the career arc. So what shows have you actually worked on, and for how long?
Well, I did Saturday Night Fever, which lasted, the show ran a year and a half, but I left after 9 months because I received another offer. So if you do the math, what's funny is people say, oh, you have a 20-year career. And I go, yeah, but Mamma Mia ran 14. So that ends up making me look really good. I did Saturday Night Fever. Then I left that for a show called Seussical, which they thought was going to be a big hit. And then it did not take off. But that's where I met the guy who hired me for Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia I did for 14 years. And after that, I was asked to do School of Rock, which lasted 3 more years. So, do you look up and you go, oh, wow, I strung together 20 years. But having a 14-year stint in the middle of those 20 was it was nice. I mean, I remember doing Mamma Mia, and a percussion sub came through, and I bet he came and went 12 times while I was there. Because he would get a new show, and the show would close, and he'd come back and play Mamma Mia for a month or so. Then he'd get another show. And I was like, it's great you're a first-call guy, but I bet he did 12 shows while I did 1.
And I think there's 2 things that really strike me at this is number one, 14 years longevity on a Broadway show in the pit is a remarkable thing. But I think what you did was you sort of redefined the idea of success along the way. That's what really struck me from reading the book, that my success was really no longer the big global rock star Sting life, but it was something different. How did you come to that realization?
Well, what I did, and because Broadway is, I have certain friends that would be miserable on Broadway, the repetition of it. They're like, no, I'd much rather be on the road. But I didn't mind the repetition of Broadway, because I felt what it did was allow me to really follow my muse the rest of the time. Broadway, the salary was good enough. It's a union job with health care and pension benefits, so I made enough money to pursue other things. So it's only 3 hours a day I had to be on Broadway. So I took the other time, I opened a recording studio, produced a lot of music, taught myself, much like your studio, I taught myself the audio version of that and from the ground up. And then it had an audio studio where I produced music for about 8 years, and I lost the lease. And then I started writing my book at that time. So I just felt like, because I'd been so blessed with financial security, a couple of years into Mamma Mia, I got the feeling this show is going to run for a while. What are you going to do to make the most of this gift?
Yeah.
And I've kind of felt like I owed it to the gods to swing for the fences. So I tried to produce hit records. I wrote a book. I really tried to be as creative as possible in the 21 hours a day I wasn't in the Broadway pit.
It really allowed you to redefine not only your concept of success, but what you could do at a creative level. I guess it gave you the stability to pursue all these other areas of interest and opportunity. That's sort of what it was key to your reinvention.
Absolutely. To me, that was the beauty of the Broadway steady job. It allowed me to pursue things, because before a steady job, I had to answer the phone and say yes to everything just to keep the bills paid. So I had no free time. I was hustling, nonstop. So Broadway allowed me to take my foot off the gas and stop the hustle and focus on maybe some longer-term goals. And I always say, to me, Broadway, or being I'm a skilled laborer on Broadway. If I'm playing Andrew Lloyd Webber's show, I feel like I'm a carpenter. I'm hammering the nails where Andrew has asked me to hammer them. He's the architect. I'm the carpenter. So I never look at Broadway as a creative outlet. It's kind of my day job that allows me to earn enough money that I can go be creative at other times. So just about everybody I know on Broadway has some kind of creative outlet. they have their own jazz band, or they do whatever. But Broadway becomes very quickly, it's like going to the factory to work.
So that's kind of an interesting thing then. The reinvention, you're still in the musical industry. Your passion is still the guitar. Your passion is still musical explorations. What you shifted was your role within the industry, big rock star life, to being the construction worker, but able to pursue all the other passions that you can find in the industry, producing records, your studio, and other things. So reinvention is a little bit of keeping what you love at the core, but chipping away and changing what you're doing around the edges.
Sure, and I would argue that despite the slam on Broadway that it's so redundant and relentless, as the guitar player, the other guitarist at Mamma Mia said to me, he said, go out on the road with Madonna and let me know when you play something different on any night. The road, you play the same songs every night. Concert tours have become much like theatrical events where the lighting, the computers, the choreography, there is no improvisation or spontaneity. It's Madonna or Lady Gaga's show is just as rigid as Mamma Mia is. But if I'm out with them, I'm not at home to do other things. I'm on an airplane all day long instead of in my studio. So I would argue that the road would really inhibit creative impulses because you're so busy traveling.
It doesn't give you any other time to do those things. And you talked a little bit about this in the book. I mean, that's the other thing that struck me in the book is, there's the excitement in the early chapters. I'm in Brazil and I'm in Japan and I'm touring Europe and I'm in these massive stadiums. But then you're getting burned out and you're discovering the routine. And it's really becoming evident that you're starting to hate the process of travel. And I guess that's where you're talking a little bit. You're playing the same guitar solo every night, and you're making the same stage moves, and the same stage things are happening with the same people. And I guess you sort of discovered that where you were in the career arc, it wasn't really working for you.
Well, again, I think a misconception is that if you're out on the road with a rock act, there's a lot of spontaneity and creativity, and it's not. It's a job too. That it's got its boundaries that it keeps you in. It's not a jazz gig where you're just making it up, do whatever you want to do that night. So the redundancy added to travel. It became the bloom was off the rose. You're like, this is not really that much fun. It became a job.
So sort of as a journeyman guitarist, you're doing the same type of thing on Broadway as you were doing with Sting. It's just you've got so many more creative opportunities along the way.
Right, and again, as I say in my book, everybody should have a chance to tour the world with a rock star once. But if you want to do it more than once, that depends on your constitution. And I have plenty of friends that have done decades of touring, and they look forward to touring. Maybe it's an escape for them. Maybe they like flying more than I do. I don't really like flying that much. So it was great to do it once.
What?
But if Sting called me tomorrow and said, let's go back out on the road, I would wince and say, okay.
Yeah, I was a roadie for Kiss for 2 concerts. That's about the extent of my experience. And I share the same name as Jim Carroll, the late Jim Carroll of the Jim Carroll Band. I sent you that in an email earlier. When you came off the tour and you were sort of expecting that you would be jumping back into the same type of high-profile life, it was a difficult time. You do talk about that briefly in the book, that your life went somewhat off the rails and that we weren't really recognizing who and what you were doing every day, and so that part of the process was very difficult. I mean, it was a long, complex process of reinvention for you too.
Well, let's just say the party continued, but the paycheck didn't, and that was the problem. That I was still living it up like I was a rock star, but I wasn't earning any money. I was, again, I was single, so I was just hanging out and partying and thinking, the phone's going to ring, another round for the boys, and it caught up to me. So I had to kind of, straighten out my life and then go back and humbly kind of start over. But I do, it's important to point out, because I mentioned this in the book, sure, if I had my druthers, I would rather have worked my way toward the pinnacle of Sting instead of starting at the top. But I do feel, and I say this in the book, it's like opportunity knocks when it well pleases. And I'd rather it knock too soon than never at all. So I do not begrudge my early success with Sting. I'm just glad it happened, period. When you read the obituary of an Oscar award-winning actor, they don't say what year of their career they won the Oscar. They just say Oscar award-winning actor. So now with the perspective of 30-some years, I'm like, hey, I'm very blessed that I was able to do that. Do I wish it had happened 10 years into New York instead of 8 months into New York? Maybe. Maybe I would have been smarter then and could have maybe maintained a few more gigs with Sting, a few more tours, but it didn't happen then. I was overwhelmed.
Do you think the typical musician or entertainer or somebody in the field of the arts is subjected to that typical career arc that, you're going to start out small and you're going to build your success and eventually it's going to get bigger and bigger and, one day you'll hit the top, and we don't do enough to prepare people for differing career paths?
No.
And so people aren't engineered with that understanding of what they need to do, strange career arc?
Well, I would assume that a lot of careers could be that way. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but certainly athletics or any kind of showbiz thing or athletics where, the art can be very uneven. But I don't know, it's just about hanging in there and just staying in there. And as I say in the book, I discovered, again, it's naive. And it's like I eventually discovered that king of a hill is not a tenured position. And what's a quote I see is like, success is rented, and the rent is due every day.
Right.
So I remember there was a monologue in a TV show one time where it was one of those medical dramas, and the doctor said, I always imagined I would eventually cross the goal line and spike the ball. He said, now I realize there is no goal line. There is no finish line. I mean, how much money do you need? How many awards do you need? How much, you keep going. It's there is no finish line. Sting's going to be 70 this year. He's still out on the road. Why doesn't he go putter around his garden with his grandchildren?
Yeah, I guess you become addicted to the crowds and the clapping and the cheering and the the rewards, and that's sort of a key thing of reinvention is it's how you define your success, and maybe you need to redefine success in a different way, and I think that's ultimately what you really did.
Well, I clearly don't have the gene that Sting or Rod Stewart or these people have that are in their 70s or pushing 70 and still out playing in front of thousands of people. I do believe I'd be in my backyard, in my garden, but because I don't have that gene that they have, and that's probably why they're still there and I'm not. Because there's a big difference between being an artist and an entertainer. I like being creative and artistic, but entertaining is its own subset of skills. That I remember I worked for a producer, T-Bone Burnett, and he said to me one time, because he said he didn't really like playing on stage, and I asked him, because at that point in my career I thought, isn't this where everybody wants to be on stage in front of cheering fans? And he said, Picasso didn't paint in front of an audience. And I thought, point taken. And I've kind of made that my North Star. It's like, I want to be Picasso. I don't need an audience to create the art I want to create.
Yeah. You want to do the art. It's really redefining the idea and concept of success. And I think that perhaps is what really struck me, with the book, and, particularly what we wrote in the latter half. And yet this, I underline this section, my reversal of misfortune underscores one of life's true enigmas. Bad news can actually be good news. Stay positive. You're always going to be exactly where you're supposed to be, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You're working with your passion. You're working within your chosen field. You've built a comfortable life, even though you started at the top and had a bit of a transition to discover where that has to be actually is.
There's a movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's got Tom Hanks and Philip Seymour Hoffman. And there's a whole scene where they tell the story of the wise man in Afghanistan. And no matter what happens, good or bad, he goes, oh, we'll see. And that's what I've learned. Is that there isn't good news, there isn't bad news. There's interesting news. And I've learned, oh, this is great. And then it turns out to be bad. Or, oh, this is horrible. Again, Seussical was a flop, which led me to Mamma Mia. So it was good news. So anytime anything happens, I quote Philip Seymour Hoffman and go, we'll see.
So tell us about the book. Where can people find it? It's on Amazon. It's on other sites. And
Yeah,
I understand you're working on a follow-up book. So as we run to a close, tell us a little bit about that.
well, that's correct. You can get it on Amazon. It's probably the easiest way. You can order it from your local bookstore if you prefer to support your local bookstore, independent bookstore, which is great. I wrote this book, and it's basically a journal of my 1 year on the road with Sting. It's about my move to New York, my year on the road with Sting, and the aftermath. And as I would continue to tell stories of people, like I said, whether it's Aretha Franklin. When I was in college, I worked with Sammy Davis Jr. for a week. And at the time, I didn't realize how incredible it was. But looking back, I go, wow, I just spent a week with Sammy Davis Jr. So as I would tell these stories to people, oh, is that in your book? And my answer would be, oh, it's not. So I'm kind of writing up the companion follow-up book with the other, decades that weren't with Sting. Because I've got a million war stories.
Well, Jeffrey, it's an absolutely fascinating story, and I think for me, that's what really appealed to me was the whole idea of a totally different type of career act. What do you do when you start at the top and you're not prepared for what comes next, and then you discover that you can get into something which is a really, really uniqueness. So everybody can find you at jeffreyleecampbell.com and details of the book, and there's also a number of videos there where you're on stage in various places around the world, including the Saturday Night Live situation with the Little Wing guitar solo. So absolutely fantastic to talk, and I'm going to be putting this up on my blog in the next several days as well, and we'll share some links to the book and to your site. So thank you for coming in, and
Thanks for having me.
I'll connect you to you in a moment.
Okay, great.